just let me know when you start.
Oh yeah, we're rolling.
Nice. Well, welcome to the Stoic Smoke Station.
Welcome to us. This is our first time being here too.
Yep.
I am out in the woods in a ditch next to my driveway.
Yep. I'm in a shipping container, which I am affectionately calling my shop.
There you go. Affectionately because it's not really a shop, or affectionately because you like it?
Because I like it.
Okay.
And it's the closest thing I've ever had to a shop. So
That's true.
And it's gonna get better. I want to do some stuff with the walls. I need to store boards better. Yeah, like this big green board. So this is a foam longboard, which usually is like $100 to $300 new because it's foam. It's not like fiberglass. It's a little cheaper.
Sure.
But I got this one for $30 because it's like broken in half. So
Okay. How
Yeah.
many surfboards have you acquired since we were surfing on paddle boards?
3. So
Okay.
there's 2 back there. They're both short boards, which are harder to ride, but they've been fun. We've been able to get some stuff. We've been able to catch some waves on them, just not been able to stand up because it's just been a little. We just haven't got there yet, like technically.
Yeah.
This is going to be easier to ride because it's a bigger board. It'll be easier to stand up on, easier to catch waves on. When it's not broken in half. So.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm gonna fix that. That'll be cool. I got it for $30.
Do you think? How do you fix a board being broken in half?
Well, this one is foam, and in my head, I was thinking, oh man, there's this special type of foam that boards must be made out of. It's just styrofoam.
Oh.
So what they do is there's like a wood frame with like a nice middle like wood slat that's like the frame and the structure of the board, and then it's all styrofoam. All of those pieces are broken in half. So my plan is to do like fiberglass construction rods because I just have some lying around. I have like 9 lying around.
Yeah.
So my plan is just to run those through the foams, glue it all back together, and then waterproof it all. And
I wonder if you could well, it'd have to be a pretty delicate operation. I wonder if you could like melt it together too somehow. Styrofoam would probably be pretty easy to heat, but
I'm thinking I'll just do some glues and run rods through it, and then that'll kind of get it all together. And then I might do some waterproofing coating or something. I don't know. It was $30. I don't even know if it's gonna work great. So that'll be like, yeah. That'll just be a fun little test.
There you go. So the short boards are harder to use, pretty much.
Yeah. So short boards are a lot harder to use because they're harder to balance on.
Yeah.
I think from just experience right now, they're easier to paddle because they're lighter.
Right.
But it's a lot harder to catch a wave too, because like I don't know, for some reason it just feels like there's less of the board being pushed by water, which is the case. I don't know if that's the science, but it just makes it hard to catch waves.
Have you used a longboard? I'm dropping so much tobacco here.
I've used, when I learned initially how to surf like 13 years ago, I learned on a longboard.
Oh, I see. 13 years is a bit of time.
Yeah, and I've done no surfing since.
Except paddleboarding, but surfing. Oh, I forgot you had that really nice lighter that your grandfather got you.
It's really nice, but it's too hot.
Oh, is it really?
So it's like scorching the top, and I can't get it to burn underneath.
I've still got the old gas station Bic lighter. It's the same one I've had for, I don't know, a long time. I haven't really smoked enough to just like burn through it. Like I probably average just like about once a week at the moment. Eventually I'll get to the point where I'm like Tolkien chain smoking like 5 a day. Or possibly more. But right now, this is where I'm at. Which is nice because I save money on tobacco.
True.
It's also a lot easier to smoke a lot when you go smoke inside. But since I live in my parents' place at the moment, I don't do that. So the whole smoking and talking thing is a little weird. I did it.
Well,
I recorded one video earlier, which I haven't posted or uploaded, and it may never be posted or uploaded. But there was a lot of relighting happening in that video.
yeah, I'm just not good enough at it yet to handle both, but you know, I'm learning. It's an art, so I just learn. Once you got something going though, it's more possible.
Yeah, I've also been kind of adjusting how I pack. Because I was kind of tamping a lot in there before.
Oh,
but
yeah?
I've started leaving just more air kind of in the pipe, and I think that's been helping me get longer smokes. And I've been having to relight towards the bottom, but since I started doing that, that has been less the case.
Nice. That's nice, yeah. Yeah. Well, I somehow brought 3 awesome lighters out here, and none of them are suited for this, so that sucks. I have this one, which
Another
is so
dub for the
cool.
old blue plastic Bic lighter.
It's like a taser. It has like a little arc between prongs. Great
Oh,
for lighting
I've
things,
seen that.
except it's horrible for lighting this stuff.
Well, yeah, you have to be able to like suck the flame down into the pipe.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the one your grandfather gave you is probably a little more for cigars.
Yeah, it really like scorches the top, so I was really struggling to get this lit a second ago.
So the old Zippo it is, huh?
I wish, but now this is out of fuel.
Oh dear.
So I have 3 sick lighters that are not suited for this. But you know what? I'm still smoking, so.
Could be worse.
Mm-hmm.
Could be a lot worse.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about why we got into pipe smoking, kind of how it happened, and what your thoughts are. I mean, it's in the name of the channel. It's going to be a lot of what we do during podcasts. So I definitely wanted to talk a little bit more about like why pipes, why not, cigarettes, cigars. What do you think is particularly interesting or exciting about pipes?
Well, why not cigars is probably an interesting question. Because the answer is it's not cigars, right? Like, I still love cigars.
Mm-hmm.
And cigars are honestly easier to smoke when you're talking.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to be interesting and sort of experimental about this is that, like, pipe smoking, like, part of the reason that I like it is because a lot of it is just kind of like time alone and time like slowing down and focusing on something small that actually honestly doesn't matter all that much, but just like the fact that you're focusing on it is the thing that kind of matters.
Yeah.
It's sort of like meditative in that regard,
Yeah.
in a way that cigars aren't. But I think cigars are more suited to like social settings in a lot of ways, which is interesting, which makes pipes an interesting choice for a channel like this, where we're also going to be chatting and talking. I'm sure that there are people who are older than us and wiser than us and better at pipe smoking than us that can have a very in-depth conversation while pipe smoking. So maybe we'll get better at it as time goes on. But I'm already having to relight here.
Yeah. Well, and personally, I think one of the great things about pipes is it's not easy,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I think there's something about that that's almost more fun than like anything else.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
it's a craft. It's its own sort of art form just to enjoy it, which is a lot of the reasons you do a lot of the things you enjoy with food and like beverages and stuff. I think it's very similar. Like sometimes you want to do a French press and not a Keurig, and sometimes it's just as simple as there's a little bit of more of an art to it. You know, it's more mechanical.
Yeah, I think it's tactile. Like I think the same thing about my sister and my dad. They collect vinyl records.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very similar thing to pipe smoking. It's like you have to interact with it more. Like interact with the music in a physical sense
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
don't when you're just playing it on Spotify or something. I think that almost has something to do with I've been thinking a lot. I recently read, and I actually just texted you about this. Um, I recently went on a trip to England for a class, to Oxford for a class that was about C.S. Lewis and his literature. And one of the book that I was studying was The Magician's Nephew, which is the first book chronologically in the Chronicles of Narnia, but I think maybe the fifth in terms of
Yeah.
release order. But
Mhm.
anyway, a big theme of that book is beauty and its relation to righteousness and such. And so I've been thinking a lot about that topic. Like I wrote an essay on it recently, and the class is over now, but I've still been kind of mulling it over. I think one thing that's interesting about beauty is it feels like there should be something that you can do with it. I don't know if that makes sense. That's the best way I can think of to phrase it. Something that you can do with it, or some way like you can interact with it, or like almost like sink your teeth into it in a way. And it's but like anything that you do is just never like never satisfies that. So like
Yeah.
for example, like when I go on hikes, there's a lot of mountains up here. I live in New Hampshire, and we'll go up into the White Mountains and everything. And you're sort of satisfied while you're climbing up to the top.
Hmm.
And then you get to the top and you can see everything. But there's just something about it that's a little beyond your grasp.
Yeah.
I don't know. People who have had this experience but people who have done a lot of hiking and such might kind of understand what I'm talking about. I don't know if I'm articulating it the best, but it just feels as though like there's something beyond like witnessing beauty that you want to do, and I don't really know what that is. And it depends on the thing what you end up doing. With a mountain, you climb it and look at it. With um, like a woman, you have a relationship and make love and all of that. But I like it just never like feels as though you're really doing the thing that you want to do. And I'm trying to figure out what exactly that is.
Yeah. Well,
And
I think there's I think there's a few different things you just kind of crossed over there in terms of even just appreciating beauty. So like I think part of the enjoyment of the climb, and then when you get to the top and you're on the mountaintop looking out, is like that's a lot more satisfying, at least for me, than if I would have just been placed there. You know, like the climb up, and then there's the breath. You like take a breath, and you're like,
mm-hmm.
whoa, it's almost better because it was so hard.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that's nice. And then there's a lot too with just beauty seems so fragile and so fleeting
Mm.
that there's something satisfying about being able to protect it or nurture it so that it can grow even if it's only for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you do that with the pipe. You know, there's a flame, you smoke, it's good, it's inevitably going to burn out, and you're really just trying to keep it lit, at least for us because we're not good at it, for as long as you can. You know,
Yeah.
and then when it's good, it's great, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not lasting even then.
Yeah, and so that's kind of that. I'm glad you circled back to pipe smoking there because that's kind of where I was going with it. It's almost like it's just another step towards whatever I'm talking about, like trying to do something with the beauty that you're attracted to. So like
Yeah.
the idea, just the flavor of the tobacco, the visual of the flame, the warmth of the experience and stuff. Like, you can get a lot of that with, say, a cigar or maybe even a cigarette. I actually haven't ever smoked a cigarette.
Yeah.
But I don't know, you just want more. And I don't know
Yeah.
that the pipe is exactly the fulfillment of that, but it's definitely closer to it.
Yeah. I'm gonna see if this little taser lighter will work. I am struggling here to get this relit.
I guess so. I mean, I talk about beauty assuming that other people know what I'm talking about. Oh, related to the pipe, like maybe
Yeah.
I'm sure there's plenty of people that don't find it beautiful, or if they do, maybe they don't quite know why. I mean, part of it, a lot of it for me is sort of a aesthetic thing. The look of it. I like the woodcraft. I like the look of the smoke and the fire and stuff. But another part of it is also like lore related, I guess is the best way I can put it. So like I think about like all the images that the idea of a pipe conjures to mind for me, which is partially
Yeah.
historical, right? So like people that I admire, I think I've already mentioned Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, um, all I'm blanking on the name, Chesterton, G.K. Chesterton. Like these guys are all very like known for their pipe smoking. So that's part of it. The whole like Lord of the Rings, hobbits and Aragorn and whatnot, all that sort of aesthetic all plays into it, which of course comes from the imagination of Tolkien. So it's all related. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and you can break it down even to its parts. Like, I've never smoked a cigarette. I've vaped and I've had a cigar. And I think with cigars, like you said, a lot of it's aesthetic. When you think of a cigar, it's more of a grittier, classy. It's like this composite of a businessman. Like sort of aggressive, but also sort of neat and done up. Not necessarily beautiful, but intentional. And a cigarette, I think aesthetically, aside from a few times, because there's hand rolled cigarettes, and then there's some characters who smoke them in like different films and
You've
stuff
got
that
like that
really,
sort of James Bond idea of it. So there's that.
yeah, yeah. But then at the same time, you also have the gritty gas station vibes that are very, very associated. You know, they're more accessible too. You can grab them and just smoke a bunch.
Mhm.
You
Yeah,
know,
people will
and
smoke like a pack a day or whatever. You can't
yeah.
really do
Well,
that with a pipe.
it's cheap. It's not good. They're easy to light. They're addictive. They're just, I don't know. There's a lot with it that pipe smoking just doesn't have. Pipe smoking is like this pipe, for example. It's a handmade pipe by a company called Lilliput. It was my great grandfather's pipe, and it's an Italian company. And this is a handmade wooden pipe, very intentional, very like it feels good in the hand. It's aesthetically pleasing. It's one of the only pipes I have that has like a sort of squareness to the stem,
Mm,
which allows me to rest it without it falling over, which is nice because I can have tobacco in it without it falling over.
that is nice.
There's something about that that's nice. And then even the smoking of a pipe is more. It's harder. It's harder to do. You can't just grab it, and you can't. It's not as easy to abuse because there's so much in it that's delicate to kind of get together.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you're good at it, you appreciate it more. And great pipe smokers don't even care about smoking more. They care about smoking better. They want better tobacco and a better smoke, a better flavor profile. And they're not as concerned with how much they can smoke in a day.
Mm-hmm.
They do smoke a lot in a day, but a lot of it has more to do with the appreciation of it, I assume.
Yeah, that's what I understand, but I'm sure there are people who might see this video that know a lot more about it than we do, so it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to hear that if any discourse pops up. But
Yeah. And I also think that if we're just going to tie that portion of that topic up, like the reason that we are attracted to it is I think because we don't fully understand it. Aesthetically, we appreciate it, and it's fun for us to try to figure out, and it's a fun thing to bring into a session, like you said, where we're focusing on topics or meditating on topics, and the act of the pipe smoking is almost meditative in itself. So that's kind of why I think we want to bring it into this channel and why it'll be in the name, which is fun, I think, you know. And then I also want to talk a little bit about Stoicism and Stoics, just because that's the next part of the name.
yeah. Well, one thing to admit for me right off the bat is I actually don't know a ton about Stoicism historically.
Yeah.
I'm sort of aware that it comes out of the Greek philosophical tradition and the main points of it, sort of just taking life as it comes and responding to things, almost not responding to things, I guess. Not responding to it, but not like reacting, not being reactive.
Yeah. Well, and I think it sort of removes the emotion out of
Mhm.
things as well. Like it's less of an emotional response to things happening and
Yeah, a
more of
lot of
like a,
focus on like self-control.
in my head, like the karate master on the mountaintop is almost similar vibes to Stoicism, just in terms of I think how we look at it. Like it's a more less emotional, more disciplined um, idea, which is cool. I think we should do more in touching on different Stoics. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah,
there's
I
probably
like
a
it.
good opportunity for some like a springboard for some research
Mm-hmm.
for me because yeah, I don't, like I said, I actually, I confess I don't know that much about it. But like you're saying, the idea of like self-discipline and the control and I guess not enslaving yourself to the things that happen to you or like your reactions to it, um, is like definitely a big part. And um, that goes well with um, the Christian tradition, which we're both a part of,
Mm-hmm.
in insofar as a lot of Christ's teaching, and I mean Yahweh's teaching in the Old Testament, has to do with being set apart from the things that are around you. Like, so even the Jews as the chosen people are like set apart from the people that are around them. But I think like we as Christians now individually are supposed to be set apart. And I think that means not just, well, if it does mean like set aside as special or something, that's like the most trivial version of it. I think the way that I understand it is apart from the world, like in a different realm of existence, I guess. And I don't know if I mean that like metaphysically. I guess the idea is eventually that'll be metaphysically true when we're in heaven and whatnot. But in terms of the here and now, like sort of, I struggle to use the word detachment because that comes with some baggage that I don't know if I want to bring in. But yeah, an ability to be free from the things that are happening to you or suffering, especially, is a big theme there.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, and that's one of the things that Christ portrays, especially on the walk to the cross, and then everything leading up to it, and then conclusively. That's one thing is like he has every reason to call down 10,000 angels, stop everything from happening. And I guess if he was more emotionally motivated or just angry and unreasonable, he might have done such a thing. But you know, there's a sort of stoic self-discipline there that was the only reason he wouldn't have stepped away from something like that when he very easily could have.
Yeah, certainly I feel like I would have if I were given the opportunity to call down angels to help me every time I was about to be in pain.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to get to the point where I could confidently say I wouldn't. But that point is not now, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, one thing that I'm curious about, I've seen a little bit of discourse online vaguely of like Stoicism in particular as a root of Greek thought and how compatible it is with Christianity in like a rich theological sense. I think as I understand, like the way we're talking about it right now, it's sort of a general thing, but I think it's possible. And like I said, I'm speaking a lot out of ignorance here, mostly just as a segue into hopefully getting more informed as we go. That Stoicism is a more particular thing and has like a more particular set of principles and things
Yeah.
that we're not aware of. And so I'd be curious too if other people who are more learned than we are in this area are aware of some things that the Stoics, um, as they were in their original form, had some kind of perspectives that aren't so compatible with Christian thought, or at least Orthodox Christian thought. So that'll be interesting too to explore a little bit, and to what degree they're compatible when you get down to like the details.
Definitely. And I think something that almost feels along the same lines is the sort of Machiavellian approach to the world.
Mm.
Because that is, I think, archetypically, if that's the right use of that word, is also associated with being emotionless, but in a very different way. You know, it's more success oriented without emotion at the cost of almost everything else, which almost seems like maybe an extreme version of Stoicism.
It's also more like directly purposeful. I think from my understanding, Stoicism is kind of a general like life philosophy. Machiavelli's The Prince is of course written particularly in the context of young rulers.
Yeah.
And so part of it is like control of not only yourself, which I think is the primary focus of Stoicism, but in Machiavelli's world, it's control of your nation or your populace, the people around you. And
Yeah.
I'd be curious. This is again another area that I'm not super familiar with. I have read The Prince. It's been some time, but yeah, to what extent that should be viewed as manipulative, and obviously sometimes manipulation can be constructive if it's done with the appropriate intentions. The trouble is that is rarely the case.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, yeah, also about that kind of the applications of that. I'll definitely have to do some research. I wonder if there's a specific topic you want to look into for next time.
Yeah.
Because we've brought up a bunch of things that we want to look at.
Mm.
So I don't
Well,
know.
and for the sake of other things that we want to look at, if that might just be what this becomes, I'm also getting more and more interested into like woodworking and craftsmanship. That's something that I think is along the lines of like the sort of textile and appreciation for things that we were talking about earlier.
Mhm.
And I would love to construct some of my own pipes, as well as work more with like boards and stuff. I'd love to get to the point maybe where I could handcraft a wooden surfboard.
Mm.
I just think that would be so cool. But I think there's something also like in terms of just hand tools and not power tools that I really like as I'm starting to get more into woodworking. And I feel like it's a very similar vein to like pipe smoking, art, vinyl records, things like that, where it's more of like, yeah, I can get, you know, a pretty affordable power tool that can just fly through everything, you know?
Mhm.
But there's something nice about doing it by hand. I think you lose a little bit with power tools. You lose some of the touch, some of feeling the grain of the wood. And then it feels like there's less love involved. It's more manufactured. And I don't know. I think it would be nice to be able to do a bit more with my hands just in general as well as a man in a lot of the ways that I want to be useful and productive. I feel like if I can, you know, make things that's yeah. I don't know.
So that's
Something with
interesting
that.
that you say that. I want to sort of bring it back to the beauty conversation we were having. Recently,
Yeah.
I've talked to some people about like buildings and like statues and other like great pieces of art
Yeah.
and how they were made in the past and how they made such a it's just such a vastly higher volume of them despite the capabilities that we have now to make things probably of equal beauty on the face of it, but to do so like
Yeah.
much more efficiently and on a much larger scale. Now, I don't understand a lot about sculpture crafting or construction, but from what I do gather, it would be easier to make something like the Notre Dame Basilica now than it was when they made it. I think that's
Yeah.
probably
Well,
a fair statement, but
yes.
we don't, right? Like we just don't
Well,
really.
yeah. I think the tricky thing too with some of those is like some of those did take hundreds of years. They were these incredibly long projects,
Mhm.
and so and specifically some of the more beautiful structures I'm thinking of, like even the capital of our great nation, the United States.
Mhm.
A lot of the pieces in there were done by hand, and the capital, I think it took like 50 to 100 years, something like that. So I remember I took a tour way too long ago now, and I just remember when they told me how long it took, I was like, that's just that's not what we see nowadays. Like at the school we just graduated from, they put up a $20 million building, massive building, maybe the biggest one on campus, in a few months. I think maybe 6 to 8 months, and we were all disappointed that it took so long. Like it shocked us,
Yeah.
you know. We were like, man, they took a long time to put that up. Probably close to a year if we look at everything that went into it, but then we look at some of these old cathedrals, and those took, some of them took hundreds of years of construction, and it was by hand, and it was more beautiful. And I think another thing that we could talk about too is like specialization. So you would have people who like specified back then in like the certain tiny sculptures that are decorative around the cathedral, right? And so you'd have that guy working for 50 years with his apprentice, and then that guy would work for 20 years training up the next apprentice in like that specific type of sculpting. And so they were able to do that maybe on a larger scale, or like they could produce more of them than maybe the other guy who's focused specifically on like columns or walls or whatever. And there's some great artists we look back on who did a lot of crossover, but they didn't produce as much.
Mhm.
And so maybe there were teams of people who were producing these statues, but I think doing anything by hand, by and large, takes longer. Aside from small like one-off projects, like if I was going to make a chair by hand, it's just not going to be as fast for me because I don't have the skill as if I would use power tools.
Mm.
But honestly, if I did it by hand, it might turn out looking a little better because I don't have the skill. Period.
Yeah, and I
So
think that skill point is really where the rub is, because, well, it's almost like there was a point, right? So trust me, this is gonna relate. In warfare, medieval warfare, probably one of the biggest aspects of battle and how you would plan everything was the bow and the longbow. And England was like fantastic with the longbows. There was a lot of training that went into it. There's a law where you couldn't do any sport on Sundays except for archery.
nice.
So people would just that's all they would do because that's all they could do. And so they got really good at it. But there's an
Yeah.
interesting bit of church history where the crossbow is made,
Yeah.
and it is much easier to use. It functions in a very similar, if not, it's certainly more effective in some areas, probably a little less in some other areas, but generally by and large it operates on a similar level, takes like half the time to train, not nearly as much strength. And they kind of just thought it was cheap, and the Pope at a certain point actually outlaws the use of crossbows by Christians in warfare, which is really funny. But
Yeah.
I think it gets to a similar point of like, so you have everybody ends up using crossbows rather than normal longbows, and you just sort of lose like the use of the longbow just sort of fades out. And so you have some niche people that are good at it now, but it doesn't, like, even within the like 50 or so years after the crossbow comes out, like it starts to fade away because it's just less cost effective. um But there's some amazing things that you can do with a longbow that you can't do with a crossbow, like in terms of the adjustment of exactly how far you want it to go with the way that you tighten the bowstring versus like with a crossbow, you just sort of draw it back to a certain point and that's what you get. And so there's almost like a finer attunement to exactly what you want that you can get with the longbow that you can't get with the crossbow. And I wonder if the power tools have had a similar effect on us where there's more building things is more accessible than it ever has been because it's a lot easier, as you say, like even you or me who doesn't really have the skill could probably watch a YouTube video, use some power tools and put together a reasonably good chair.
Yeah.
But like you just don't have that much control. Like I wonder, because like certainly for sculpture, like it could be the case. I'm just kind of speculating here because I'm not super familiar with the trades that I'm talking about, but it could be, I could see it being the case that it actually isn't possible to build things as beautiful as you can by hand. And I mean that technically. Like obviously there's something beautiful about just the fact that you built it by hand, but setting that aside, it could be the case that you actually can't make something as beautiful with power tools as you can by hand. And so simply put, less people know how to do it now because they know how to use power tools.
Maybe. Yeah, I think that could definitely be the case. And I think another thing that's along with that I think we could put in. There's a lot of different things you could say about that. One good example is, let's say woodworking. We just wrap back into that. So like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not very good at it, but I like it and it's fun, right? If I just start doing it faster, then I'm not going to develop some of the smaller, more technical skills that will just happen on accident, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a big part of becoming a better craftsman. There's definitely a balance, and some people are so talented that when they jump to power tools, it's like advancing their skill. So like it may be even exponentially more beautiful or more structurally sound or whatever because they already know how everything works. So by the time they get the better tools, they're like, oh, I can do what I know how to do better.
Right.
Whereas for me, someone who's very entry level, like I don't know how to look at the grain of wood and know what it means. I know that I should probably go with the grain of wood. That sounds right. But like if I get stuck when I'm using like a hand plane or a chisel, anything like that, or any sort of like saw, if I get stuck and I'm just stuck in the wood, I have to sit there and struggle with that. I just can't turn the power tool up higher and plow through it, you know? Like I have to
Yeah.
sit and wonder, like, maybe there's a better way, you know? And then
Right.
through that process, which happens over a long time, over small projects that take far too long to complete, but it's that process of slowly working through it with like a hand tool where it's just very like I'm right there on the focused thing that teaches you so many more lessons about being a craftsman in that given trade. And I would assume the same is for most things. I mean, even if we look at automobiles nowadays, like, so if you look at like the Ford F-150, one of the most mass produced vehicles ever to exist because it's also the number one best selling vehicle of all time, like including cars, motorcycles, everything. It's the number one.
Mm.
Now, what we've lost with that is any sort of like uniqueness or beauty that can be associated with it. It is the ultimate utilitarian vehicle. You know, it's a truck, an American truck. It can drive over rocks. You can tow 10,000 pounds. You can pull your boat. You know, you could run it into a wall and it's probably okay. You can rip pieces of it off and it's going to go. So we haven't lost utility there. But what we have lost is like, if you look at the supercars and the sports cars of today, the multi-million dollar ones, like some Ferraris, Koenigsegg, Bugatti, a lot of these vehicles that cost anywhere between $2 and $5 million to buy, they're produced by hand, one at a time. Sometimes 7 will come out total. Like they'll release 7 of that model, and you know 7 billionaires buy it or whatever, you know. But it's like that's the last of what's being done by hand in the automobile world. Everything else is done by machines, and so we get mass-produced things that haven't lost all their utility, but they've lost something else, something that gives them like a bit of a soul, you know.
Right.
And then we have people like garage mechanics who will start tinkering with their cars by hand, and they sort of breathe the soul back into it. There's a bit of craftsmanship there. You see a modified car on the street, or you see like there's some handmade things like the Amish built churches and stuff.
Mm.
You look at these things that are done by craftsmen by hand that maybe you can tell they're still useful, they're still practical, they still have utility, but they're also set apart in some way that you're like, wow, you can tell someone put their hands on that and
Yeah,
really got into it in a way that mass-produced things just aren't,
for sure. Yeah, and
Which you could wrap back to pipes.
you could. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely like, even just, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, even just knowing that something was handmade almost like makes it more beautiful, even if there's literally zero difference in the way that it looks. Um, and that reminds me a little bit of, we both recently graduated from the same school. I think we mentioned that already. And we were in a philosophy class where we read Das Kapital, I think was the one, of Karl Marx works. And it was interesting because I was observing, at least, that, like, being a red-blooded American, I'm certainly no communist, but I've found myself very sympathetic to a lot of Marx's criticisms of capitalism. Particularly, he has this one idea about, and I struggle to remember what he called it. I honestly didn't think his writing was very good, so I don't know that it really matters. But generally, the idea that he was trying to communicate was that when you take capitalism at its face, the way sort of like Adam Smith would have conceptualized it, you have like somebody that makes a product, and they're there from the start of the process to when it's sold. And when you divorce the person who made the product, and I'm talking like the whole product, not even just part of it. So like, say, a blacksmith who makes a sword and he sells it to somebody, like, as soon as you start cutting that process up, some kind of immaterial something is lost in that splitting of the process. And I don't really know what that is. Maybe it's beauty, or maybe it's something that's beautiful. But whatever it is, it does seem that it goes away when you approach it like in a more factory oriented sort of way. Sorry, I'm doing a lot of things kind of off camera here. I was just cleaning up my pipe and putting it away because I have not been able to keep it lit to my satisfaction. So we'll give it another go later. But anyway, yeah, so there's something to throw in there. I do want to say, though, before, like, I don't want to sound ungrateful. I think there's a lot of things that efficiency, like, power tools or machinery or whatever, has like brought us a lot of prosperity, and it's allowed somebody like me or you to own a truck. And that's really good. And I think, I mean, we have more prosperity and less poverty than we ever have. Even our poverty is not so bad compared to how it has been in the past. And,
No.
as a Christian, I'm down with making poverty less bad. But there's just some things to be careful about with it still, even though I think there's a lot of positives.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing I would say about handmade products. Sorry, I'm eating fresh made bread. This is just phenomenal.
Never apologize for eating fresh made bread.
With handmade products, even if they're really close, they're never exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
And those sort of imperfections make them more beautiful. But I would say handmade products that are intentionally a little different. So, like, let's say you have a guy who makes, tables. He's a woodworker. And let's say he never makes a table that's exactly the same and he does it on purpose. Every table that guy sells may be beautiful and everyone may want one. And they're all going to have their own little bit of value because they're just a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
And that is entirely lost on mass production. And then, especially if you take the face away, like you're saying, and you just have some no-name big company mass producing a bunch of things, it has even less value then. And then let's say you see it on a shelf and you see 100 identical items. It's just, they're useful sometimes, but you just don't care about them the same. Like,
oh, yeah.
I have a couple of hand tools, or even like the surfboard, like things that are just broken, but they're valuable because when I fix them, they're going to be hand fixed. They're going to be a tool that I use with my hands that was made or remade with my hands, which is going to have more valuable than something that is just mass produced.
Mm-hmm. And I think decreasing the value is largely the purpose. I hadn't really thought of it in those terms before, but they literally, the point of doing it like that is to drive down the value so you can sell more units. And in so doing, as we already mentioned, kind of making it accessible to more people, and some people who don't have as much money, so might not be able to afford something as valuable. And so there's something valuable about that endeavor. But obviously, I think most people would recognize that, like, that's not really the point anymore. Like, for most companies, they're not thinking, let's make this cheaper for our consumers so that we can, benefit more people. I mean, I'm sure there are some corporations that think that way, but I don't think there's many.
No, and because part of the problem is, a company cares when they're trying to make a product more affordable, but they're not sacrificing the quality of the product. That is a surefire way to be like, this company cares. This is a high quality product that they're trying to make more affordable for everyone. What we see nowadays is the product quality wise diving down along with the price. And then we know they don't really care about us. They just want more people to be able to use it. So I guess they kind of care about sales and,
Right.
I guess it's more accessible. But then it breaks and it's not worth fixing because it's plastic and I just buy another one for $10. Whereas like some of my saws that are a little bit older that I put some time into kind of restoring, same with some of my axe heads and stuff, like I'm not going to go buy another one. I'm going to fix these because these just have more value, as opposed to something mass produced that's plastic. When it breaks, I'm like, I should have got one made out of wood and metal.
Yeah, you said something interesting there. I've been trying to think about what the element that you lose in that sort of capitalistic reduction process that we were speaking about earlier. And I think you mentioned that I think it's about care, like the care that somebody put into it. So, like, let's say the blacksmith makes me a sword or whatever. Like, he's making that whole product for me, and the reason that he's making it good is so that I will be satisfied with it. And certainly there could be, some sort of materialistic element to that, like he wants me to be satisfied with it, so I'll buy another one from him later. But that's a lot more palatable to me than, like, they don't care at all what the quality of it is, and they just want me to buy it anyway. And so I think a lot of it, and maybe the beauty of it, comes from the care that was put into it, or like the level to which the person who made it wants it to be good and useful for you in your life. It's almost like a relational thing. And I guess maybe this is probably me understanding a little more what Marx was talking about. I can't remember exactly the terms he used, like I said, something like the fetishization of the product, something like that. But yeah, it's like a relational element. Like, economy, in this sense, is fundamentally relational. Somebody does something for you, they want it to be good for you, they want it to be useful for you. Whereas, like, the guy who puts the holes in the composition notebook that I use does not care whether it's good or useful for me, right? He's just a guy that puts the holes, and I don't really expect him to either, right? Like, he's a guy selling his time. He's not doing anything skillful, and he knows that. He's just sitting there pressing the button or whatever it is to punch the holes in the paper. And that's fine. I don't know if that's like I don't want to say that's a moral reflection on him or anything, but it's just inherent in the process, is that there's a less care and less relationship between the seller and the buyer.
And we oftentimes, even so, we know this deep down. I think everyone thinks about this. Is like we oftentimes associate more expensive products with being high quality. Nowadays, you kind of wonder whether or not they are. But like, oftentimes, I'll even say, like, do you want to buy a cheap one or do you want to buy a good one?
Yeah.
And we assume that there is at least a little bit more put into something more expensive. And nowadays, buying anything that's handmade is just more expensive than buying anything mass produced because, it's so ridiculously cheap to mass produce things nowadays. So,
and even if the mass produced thing is actually better quality, which I think does happen sometimes, you'd still find that the handmade one was more expensive. But honestly, I feel like I'd be willing to pay that price. in a lot of cases. I mean, it depends on what I'm getting and how much I need it and what I need it for. But generally speaking, I think the handmadeness of something, or like the care element, the relational element, matters enough to me that I'm willing to pay more most of the time.
Also, I think when we look back in time a little bit, people had less things.
That's
So,
true. Yeah.
well, and well, I mean, it's kind of funny, but like, sorry, my wife made focaccia bread by hand. I don't know what makes it focaccia, but it is amazing.
It almost looks like there's like cheese involved, but I can't really tell from here.
No, I have no clue. Anyhow, what I was gonna say is I saw this video about people who were hand making shoes, and the shoes today sell for $2,000 a piece. But
Per
the
shoe
idea
or like
behind
per pair of shoes?
sorry,
Per shoe or per pair of shoes?
per pair.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, but the idea is that you won't need another pair of these. They're leather boots. You won't need another pair for the next 6 years. And the next time that those boots wear out, they're going to fix them by hand and for a much lower cost. And so you might just never need another pair of boots again. That's the idea behind this small company that's hand making shoes, right? And I think if we look back in time, maybe that's closer to what things looked like. Is like people didn't have shops full of tools, especially if they had one trade. They had a few tools that they knew they needed, and if they were made by a local person who made the tool, then they would just go to that person when it broke, or they would fix it themselves. But they never exceeded an excessive amount of things. It was like, and even my grandfather, I've talked to him. He remembers when he got his first pair of shoes that wasn't hand-me-downs. I think he was like 15. He bought them himself, and it was his only pair of shoes.
Mm.
And that was my grandfather, so that's not that far away. He's a bit older,
Right.
but it's not that far away. And he grew up in a rural town. He lived on a small plot of land with like I think he had 13 siblings, so they didn't have a lot of money. But not that far away, he was taking care of his shoes because it was his only pair.
Mm-hmm.
So he's probably barefoot a lot. I'll say that. But also, I get rid of shoes because I have so many, and they're not high quality shoes. And usually, if I wear a pair of shoes every day, it burns out after a year. Those were never going to last me longer than that, you know?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so to bring that all back to pipe smoking,
Which you should as often as you can.
yes, I agree. It's a very good prescription for taking time, and I don't mean just taking. A lot of people today talk about taking time for yourself or whatever. I don't really know what that means exactly, but that's not what I'm saying. I think it forces you to take time to like think because you have nothing else to do while you're doing it. So I think it's very good for that. But part of obviously part and parcel of the whole process is the pipe itself, what it looks like, how it was made, and such. Now I don't have a handmade pipe. I actually just gifted my dad one recently.
Oh, nice. Good.
That I got from a antique store while I was in Oxford. It was made in Dublin, Ireland. I'll bring it on the show sometime. I don't have it with me right now. But it's a very cool looking pipe. And there is something about not just having that, but being able to interact with it tactily and use it, like engage with it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So that element is especially valuable. I think, like we've been talking about, that the element of handcraftedness is valuable in anything, but I think it's especially valuable in the pipe because the value of the pipe itself is really only in the degree to which you enjoy interacting with it. And so having it be handmade, I think, is super valuable in this sort of hobby, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. Just to further your point, I think you could have a block of wood that you cut a little bowl in, drill a hole through, and you could smoke that.
Mm-hmm.
Just a single block of wood, you could smoke it. Maybe you would treat it with some sort of food safe like oil. That way, it's properly coated. Like there's things that could go into that. Mm-hmm. But even still, you could have a block of wood and you could smoke it, and you could call it a pipe. Mm-hmm. And functionally, it is doing exactly what a pipe would do.
Right.
But like you said, when it's handmade, when it fits in your hand right, or when the wood is beautiful, or when it has some sort of texture to it that sets it apart from another pipe, or the material's not just wood. Sometimes there's ivory ones, or like there's so many. Or maybe you use two different woods, one for the stem, one for the bowl. Maybe there's something that goes in with that. Like maybe you have a filter at the base. There's so many things that could just not make it any more of a pipe functionally, but make it so much more of a pipe aesthetically and just in terms of appreciation by an individual, that just sets it far and above any block of wood would be, but it has nothing to do with function. Not really.
Yeah, that's the most, I think that's the reason that pipes highlight this in particular is that, like, I've smoked probably 4 or 5 different pipes at this point. They've all worked the same. Like, there's no, like, and the price range has been between like $5 and $60. My experience,
which is a big range.
it is a pretty big range, and my experience in terms of the actual how the smoke went into my mouth and out of it, how it was lighting it and stuff, was virtually like, I don't know that I could tell you anything that was different about any of them from that perspective. But I'm in fact, it's for some of the pipes that I've smoked, they would be like $60 to me would be a steal. with no functional benefits at all. So yeah, just sort of enhancing what you're saying. Like, I think for those of you that haven't smoked pipes, smoked popes. I don't know what you're doing with the Pope if you're doing that, but for those of you that haven't smoked pipes, yeah, there's almost no functional benefit to a more expensive pipe in terms of the raw utility of what's going on mechanically.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I would say maybe there's a few things that if you really got into the weeds about, like a longer stem or a different shape, maybe the smoke different, maybe it burns a little different. I won't take that away from it, but like you're saying, I mean, it does the same thing.
But you can get one that's the same shape and size and same bowl size, and the cost range can be between that like $5 to $60 range, and the experience will not be that different. There are definitely different types of pipes that you can get. Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that there aren't, but if you're like, you could get the same pipe, vastly different prices, and I think your experience doing it, smoking it, would be pretty much the same. I guess the only thing I will say is the corncob pipe that I smoked, I did end up kind of scraping through the bottom of it a little bit with my cleaning tool, but I think that was more of a user error than anything I would attribute to the pipe.
I don't know. I mean, I would definitely say that pipe was the worst one.
Yeah, that's probably true.
But
it was the first one, and nothing else will be able to say that.
And it worked.
And it worked. It worked well.
They're pretty much irreducibly complex, It's like
Yeah. Yeah. Charles Darwin's least favorite thing, the pipe.
Yeah, irreducibly complex.
Yep. Well, okay, so there's a few thoughts on pipe smoking and some other things.
Yeah. And I think as we develop this too, we can have a little bit better of a structure, maybe a few different segments that we'd like to go over. We can talk a little bit more in depth about topics that we put time into studying too, which I think will just vastly increase the quality of conversation. But this was, I think, a fun way to show what exactly this is going to be about, and I'm proud of it for sure.
Yeah, I think this was a fun conversation. It'll be interesting to see to what degree people engage with it or find it interesting. So that'll be fun.
Definitely.
All right, that's that.
Awesome.